Welcome to another Fireside Chat on ABC News and News Radio. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Gidello.
This week, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris hit the campaign trail ahead of next week's Democratic convention, while President Trump claims a diplomatic breakthrough.
While everyone's been focused on the election, the economy and the pandemic, we've learned a lot more about the 2016 election and the Steele Dossier. I'll be talking to journalist Aaron Marte.
And we'll have a chat with the first black woman elected US Senator and the second to run for President, Carol Moseley Braun, about Joe Biden and the black vote in 2020.
Plus also the latest on mail-in voting, the mask mandate, so much more, John.
So much more, Chaz. But first, the big political news of the week, of course, the announcement that California Senator Kamala Harris would be Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate.
Hi, sorry to keep you.
That's all right. You ready to go to work?
Oh my God, I'm so ready to go to work.
And yesterday, they did get straight to work. The first of a new kind of COVID-era campaign event, a rally at a school gymnasium in Delaware near Biden's house with a few reporters, lots of flags and absolutely no regular people. But the size of the venue probably helped to recreate a bit of a rally feel and try and show the two have overcome any lingering hard feelings from last year's primary. They certainly bonded over Joe Biden's late son, Beau.
Kamala, you've been an honorary Biden for quite some time. You know, I came first to know who Kamala was through our son, Beau Biden. They were friends.
And Kamala Harris also acknowledged that connection.
Beau was the kind of guy who inspired people to be a better version of themselves. He really was the best of us. And when I would ask him, where'd you get that? Where did this come from? He'd always talk about his dad. And I will tell you, the love that they shared was incredible to watch. It was the most beautiful display.
Kamala Harris also acknowledged some of the past tensions and the criticisms that she faced from some Biden confidants that she was, quote, too ambitious, and she made it very clear she would be loyal.
After the most competitive primary in history, the country received a resounding message that Joe was the person to lead us forward. And Joe, I'm so proud to stand with you. And I do so mindful of all the heroic and ambitious women before me, whose sacrifice, determination, and resilience makes my presence here today even possible.
And then she showed why she's on the ticket in the first place, as the former prosecutor took square aim at the current administration's handling of the coronavirus pandemic.
When other countries are following the science, Trump pushed miracle cures he saw on Fox News. While other countries were flattening the curve, he said the virus would just, poof, go away. Quote, like a miracle. So when other countries opened back up for business, what did we do? We had to shut down again.
So, Chaz, for anyone that's been to these kind of campaign launches in the past, this was a very different affair and something of a preview of next week's Democratic convention as well. But it seemed to serve its purpose, no major fumbles.
Yeah, no, they rolled out fine. It's just these early days, you never know what's going to be happening in the weeks ahead. We're just going through the motions at the moment, just ticking off what she brings to the table and what the knocks on her are. And in a month's time, we'll probably, if we're still talking about her, there'll be a new controversy. That will be the reason why. So let's do our job. Let's go through what she brings to the table. You brought up the personal connection already with Beau and through Joe. That's important, the personal connection, if they're working close together.
And it creates a narrative around why did Biden pick Kamala Harris that overcomes these accusations of, he picked her because it shores up the black vote and the female vote. So this is a non-pragmatic reason for making this choice, as well as the fact that she's clearly very competent and qualified.
Well, that's the next one. Ready to be president. YouGov had the poll out, a Snap poll, 53% of people said that she was ready to be president. And that's important because, get this one, according to Rasmussen, 59% of likely voters believe that Joe Biden will not finish his first term. Wow.
Given that he is going to be 8 years older when he takes office in January next year, if elected, than the oldest ever first-term president was, happens to be Donald Trump. That is clearly a huge issue, and it was a huge issue as well back in 2008 when John McCain, who was at that point the oldest ever first-term candidate, he lost obviously, but that's why Sarah Palin's apparent lack of competence for the job was such a huge knock on her. Now, Kamala Harris didn't have a great presidential campaign last year. She had her moments. She got to second to Joe Biden at one point in August, September after those first couple of debates. But there was never a question as to whether she was qualified to be president, just whether she was running a particularly good campaign.
Well, and the proof of that is right now. Right now, Conservatives are throwing everything at the wall. I'm going to go through this in a second. All kinds of contradictory criticisms. No one's saying she's not qualified.
No.
So that says something in itself, I think. The next thing, you've already played the grab of her prosecuting the case. The Vice President's meant to be a bulldog. And not necessarily fight fair either. The Vice President, like Joe Biden, he's supposed to be avuncular and friendly and Uncle Joe, and she's supposed to be mean and she's supposed to go hard. And she, during that same speech, she went real hard at times about COVID.
And tragically, more than 165,000 lives that have been cut short. Many with loved ones who never got the chance to say goodbye. It didn't have to be this way. 6 years ago, in fact, we had a different health crisis. It was called Ebola. And we all remember that pandemic. But you know what happened then? Barack Obama and Joe Biden did their job. Only 2 people in the United States died. 2. That is what's called leadership.
Okay, now that there was completely unfair. Ebola is nothing like COVID. Ebola is not nearly as contagious. It doesn't spread through the air. It was not a mystery disease. But that's kind of your job when you're the Vice President, to fight dirty.
Yep.
And she does it well.
And it's a kind of a courtroom tactic as well. And this is where, her other, you're right, her jobs are to be the attack dog, to attack Donald Trump and to a lesser extent Mike Pence in their one-off vice presidential debate in October. Also to talk up Joe Biden. She showed that as well, because Joe Biden can't say too many great things about Joe Biden. He can talk about his experience, but he can't say, I'm a profoundly decent human being with a deep wellspring of empathy based on a lifetime of tragedy and so on. Kamala Harris can do that and can do it well. So she's hit the ground running, and she's certainly showing us the reasons this week why she was the pick.
I'll tell you what else she can do. She can raise money. She's got lots of Wall Street friends, and she's got lots of Silicon Valley friends. She even raised money from the Trumps, $8,000 from Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump back in 2011 to 2014. Don't think they'll be giving her money this time. Also, there's this socialist anarchist thing going around, and according to the New York Times at least, she's a pragmatic moderate. Now, I wouldn't say she's a pragmatic moderate. You look at her voting record, the DW nominate is what they usually use. She's second most liberal in the Senate, behind Elizabeth Warren. She's more liberal than Bernie Sanders, according to that measure. I think he's 4th. There's a progressive measure called Progressive Punch, which has her as, I think it's 4th, I think she is. Yeah, she's 4th, and Elizabeth Warren's 5th, and Bernie Sanders is 10th. So anyway, she's liberal, but having said that, she doesn't wear it on her sleeve in the way that Bernie Sanders does or Elizabeth Warren.
And a voting record based on what makes it to the floor in the Senate for a vote is very different to what is your worldview and what are your policy prescriptions. And you can certainly say, even though Harris had difficulty in finding where she belonged in that Democratic field, and she was kind of closer to Biden than she was to Warren and Sanders, but she was trying to be the kind of, everything to everybody, and in the end it didn't work out, which is why Trump has, with his usual skill at highlighting in a nickname what somebody's Achilles heel is, talking about Kamala Harris being a, quote, phony is potentially reasonably effective, because that was the kind of narrative that emerged organically through last year's primary. Was she's trying to be all things to all people and we really don't know who she is.
Well, on that note, let's go through the knocks. That's one of them. Also, her record as an Attorney General in California, there's a definite knock there. On one hand, she did establish the nation's first state-led database tracking police killings and racial bias, but she also threatened the parents of truant kids with jail time. She fought to uphold wrongful prosecutions even after it was proven that it obtained through police misconduct, such as evidence tampering and false testimony. She was still backing them even then. And they're the things that Gabbard schooled her in debates, of course. She also opposed marijuana legislation all the way up to 2014, even though now she's pretending she was always a great fan of marijuana legalisation. We'll leave that aside. Her ideology is the other thing, which people are knocking on. The right seem a bit confused. Is she a corporatist sellout or is she a socialist anarchist? These two tweets were doing the rounds at the same time from Trump supporters. Wall Street is delighted with Biden-Harris and will aid and abet the radical socialists and anarchists at every turn. But the Sanders left have made up their mind. Ex-Sanders spokesperson Breonna Joy Gray tweeted, "We are in the midst of the largest protest movement in American history, the subject of which is excessive policing, and the Democratic Party chose a top cop and the author of the Joe Biden crime bill to save us from Trump. The contempt for the base is wow." All right, so she's not a fan, but what's the truth? I personally think she's a bit like Biden, actually. I think she's a bit of a weather vane who will generally gravitate to wherever she thinks she needs to be to win. Probably a good thing to be in an election. That was certainly the view of the Justice Democrats communications guy, Walid Shahid. He tweeted, "Both Biden and Kamala Harris have somewhat floating ideologies, like a balloon tied to a rock. Harris being to Biden's left as senator and 2020 candidate means that progressives and social movements have moved that rock substantially and will continue to do so." I think that pretty much sums up. What do you think?
Well, in other words, she is a pragmatist, as is Joe Biden, a pragmatist. In terms of their progressive credentials, I guess there's a fundamental problem whether you're judging Joe Biden on the votes he took against federally mandated busing to desegregate schools in the 1970s, or Kamala Harris as Attorney General of California and decisions that she took in 2010, 2011, or indeed prosecutions that she made in the 1990s and so on. Always judging things by contemporary standards is problematic, because if you're saying, well, this decision made 20 years ago or 10 years ago puts her out of step with, where the centre of gravity is now in the Democratic Party, that's always difficult. So the fact that she is getting criticism from both sides, but there are inconsistencies in their criticisms, just as there's inconsistencies in a record, means that she's a little bit reminiscent of somebody like Barack Obama, who was hard to pin down. And becomes a little bit of a cipher of whatever they need to be to get into a position of power to then make the decisions that are essentially not guided by ideology, but by a broad world view and a sense of social justice. So I don't think this is going to be a particular problem for Kamala Harris. And the idea that she is the socialist foot soldier inside the Trojan horse that is demented Joe Biden being dragged through the gates into the presidency, it's just not going to wash.
No, I don't think so either. I know we've got to move on, but I just want to mention one thing which I think is a bogus criticism, which is people are saying that she basically accused Joe Biden of sexual assault. That's what Tucker Carlson said. She accused him of sexual assault. What they're referring to is, remember last year in April, there were some women came forward who said that Joe Biden was basically creepily invading their space.
Lucy Flores, sniffing her hair.
Exactly, yes. And they asked Kamala Harris about that, and this is what she said: "I believe them and I respect them being able to tell their story and having the courage to do it." And when she was asked whether Joe Biden should run for president, because he wasn't running at that point in time, she said, "He's going to have to make that decision for himself. I wouldn't tell him what to do." Now, to me, that's a non-answer. And it's not about sexual assault. It's about creepiness, absolutely, possibly sexual harassment if you're being harsh. It's not sexual assault. It's not the Tara Reid thing. People are trying to conflate them.
Right.
And that's not fair.
And at the time, Tara Reid, when she did speak out early on, more than a year ago, it was about sort of handsiness or just sort of, suggesting that she was good looking. It was a year after that she actually made the allegations that have since, well, they're still out there, but seem to be impossible to verify. Yeah. So, I feel as though that's probably, given as well President Trump's record in that area, that is a non-issue as well. Meanwhile, though, there are growing concerns about how this election is going to be conducted. The US Postal Service is being reorganised and cut back at a time when more and more Americans are depending on it during the COVID crisis. They're buying a lot of stuff online as well, and it is potentially, depending on what happens with the pandemic in the next 3 months, but based on some of the primaries, we could be seeing 50% of votes being mail-in absentee ballots, and not just in the states that encourage it, but in all states as well. And there's real concerns as to whether the mail is going to get through.
Yeah, it could be even more than 50%, actually. It could even be up to 60%. But it's related to this fight about the COVID stimulus that we talked about on Wednesday. You might recall Nancy Pelosi and Trump are having a standoff about what the renewed economic stimulus will look like, which an American desperately needs it because it's still in a worse hole than it was at the peak of the GFC. We told you on Wednesday how Trump had tried to outflank Pelosi by writing memoranda that unilaterally took care of the more urgent concerns. But there's huge problems with them. They're very complicated. No one knows how they're supposed to work. For example, the extra unemployment benefits. Now, they're supposed to be the federal government pays $300 and the state governments pay $100.
Yep.
But this is what the director of his economic council, Larry Kudlow, had to say.
And I think it's going to come to about $1,200 per person. That's a huge
You keep saying
wage
$1,200 per
increase.
person. Are you talking about in addition to the unemployment that they're already getting?
Oh,
Where
no.
does that number
that's
come
the
from?
Payroll. I beg your pardon. The $1,200 will come from the payroll tax deferral.
Okay, we're going to get to
on
that.
top
Okay,
of this,
all right, because there's a lot of
I'm
numbers here,
sorry.
and it's a little confusing. I'm going to get to payroll tax in a minute. Go ahead.
It should be $800. I beg your pardon. It should be $800 for the unemployment.
800 or 400?
No, it should be $800. If the states step up, we're prepared to match. That should come out $400 federal, $400 states.
Okay, we'll move on because I think that's not what the president said, and it's a bit confusing. And I think the fact that it's not entirely known is very telling.
It certainly is very telling. No one has an idea what's going on. This is where the mail-in voting comes in, because Pelosi's insisting on $3.5 billion in the package to make sure mail-in voting can occur smoothly. Trump is refusing to let that happen.
They want $3.5 billion, and they're not going to do a deal that's good for the American people. Therefore, they're not going to get the $3.5 billion. Therefore, they can't do the universal mail-in vote. It's very simple. How are they going to do it if they don't have the money to do it?
Okay, so Pelosi is saying the stimulus isn't happening without the mail-in voting funding. Trump is saying the stimulus isn't happening with the mail-in voting. I have no idea what's going to happen with the mail-in voting or the economy in the meantime. It's a complete mess.
Yep. Well, yeah, they're playing a game of chicken right now, and
the economy is in between them.
And the election is coming at them like a train through a railway viaduct at the moment. So, look, it's a huge problem. Meanwhile, the states are looking at, well, okay, what are the ways around this, including things like building, 300 kilogram steel drop boxes that are basically ballot boxes in front of town halls and things that become, instead of putting your mail-in ballot into the postal system, it goes straight into this drop box, and that could be one of the ways to make sure that things aren't getting lost in the system. But it's a huge disaster, and clearly it's all playing to Trump's benefit because, as we've discussed numerous times, if the result is unclear or uncertain for several weeks, all of the seeds of doubt that he has been sowing over the last many months about the possibility that there could be fraud and things going missing and everything else, this is all heading towards a very, very confusing election result at a time when pretty much everything in American life is very confusing and dangerous. It's a recipe for disaster.
I agree.
All right, let's have a look at the polls this week. And the national polls all had Biden up by between 4 and 12 points, actually 13 points in one poll. Trump's vote has slipped into the 30s, according to a poll from YouGov yesterday. Biden leading by a full 10 points there. Biden's lead is back up over 7 percentage points in the average of national polls. The first post-VP announcement polls are coming in today, and according to Morning Consult, 53% of voters approve of the Harris pick. 29% say they disapprove. 84% of Democrats are happy, so too are 79% of black voters. 44% of independents are happy, while 27% of independents say they do not approve. According to an Ipsos poll this morning, 47% of voters say Harris is an excellent or good choice, 24% say they don't have an opinion, 29% say Harris is not a good choice or a poor choice for VP. Head-to-head against Mike Pence, Kamala Harris has higher net approval right now, +5 overall. Pence is at -14. Asked if they found the VP candidate inspiring, Harris comes out on top, but maybe not by as much as you would expect given the historic nature. First woman of colour nominated for the office, compared to probably the least colourful politician, literally and figuratively, we've ever seen, Chaz.
It's true. While we're talking polling, 538 have released their election model, which at this point in time is giving Biden a 72% chance of victory. Coincidentally, almost an identical probability they gave Hillary Clinton of victory in 2016. Although there is much more uncertainty now, 81 days out, and it was the day before with Hillary Clinton, so that is a better result for Biden. Interestingly, their popular vote margin right now is about 7 points, but the margin of their tipping point state, which is Pennsylvania, is only 5 points. So once again, there's the seeds of a situation where the Democrats win the popular vote, but Trump wins re-election. So keep an eye out on those numbers.
Yeah, it was in 2016 that Kamala Harris became just the second woman of colour elected to the United States Senate. The first was Carol Moseley Braun, elected as a Democrat from Illinois in 1992. She served in the Senate with Joe Biden and endorsed his campaign for president this year. Carol Moseley Braun also later became a United States ambassador, and in 2004, she ran for the Democratic presidential nomination.
My grandfather fought for this country in World War I in France, and he came back. He couldn't sit in the front of the bus or even vote, but he did so because he believed in the promise of America. I'm running for president because I want to protect and preserve it.
And Carol Moseley Braun joins us from Chicago. Madam Ambassador, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Biden has now in one gaffe implied that authentic black people only vote Democrat. And in another gaffe, he's implied that the black community isn't as diverse as the Latino community. So at one point in time, do you get worried that the Democrat nominee is just taking the black vote for granted?
Remember, I worked with him for 6 years, and he presided over my confirmation as ambassador to New Zealand. And so we go back, I've known him for a long time. And so I can tell you, while he does have a particular ability to, the old foot and mouth, right? He does that from time to time. At the same time, I can tell you that I do not know anyone in politics who is as non-racial or non-racialized as Joe Biden. He gets it in terms of race. He understands the issue. He's always been on the right side of history in terms of black people, as far as I know, over the years. And that's why I've been such an enthusiastic supporter. I wouldn't have done this but for the fact that I know this person. I've seen him in operation. I know how he responds in situations. And so does he have an assumption that he's entitled to the black vote? No, I don't think he does. But would he like to have it? I'm sure he would. And I think he's going to do everything he can to reciprocate, because he's a very loyal person as well.
Ambassador, from very early on when Joe Biden said that his running mate would be a woman, and now with his choice, criticisms have abounded. This is tokenism. This is a diversity hire. You faced your fair share of sexism and racial prejudice in your political career. How do you think they can manage this issue? Is it even an issue?
Let me say this, and you used the exact right word when you said prejudice. You can't really argue with crazy. The fact is that people will come up with whatever they want to come up with to try and undermine a situation. But I know that Joe Biden is the most qualified person to be president. He has a platform for our country that will move us forward instead of backwards. He's right on the issues. And I think that at the end matters more than anything else. And I'm just hopeful that we don't wind up with one of these diversionary campaigns. I mean, campaigns are full of everybody coming up with every way they can possibly undermine the opposition. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get through this without too much rancor, although there's likely to be a lot of it. But I'm just hopeful it comes out that Joe Biden pulls it off and wins the election, because elections have uncertain outcomes. And even though the polls look really good right now, I would not want to jinx it by predicting a Biden win. But I hope that he will win, and that truth will out, and that sensibility and logic will out also, that people will see the correct path and will vote for him.
And Ambassador, I'm really interested in your take on the current debate over the Confederate flag. In recent weeks, we've seen it finally come down in Mississippi. We're seeing a reappraisal of a lot of Confederate symbols. That was an issue that you championed in the 1990s as senator around the Confederate flag. I'm wondering, given that President Trump is kind of standing by it to a large extent, how do you think that issue is going to play out by November?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, I was the only Black person in the United States Senate when that issue came up. And it came up in a bizarre way. It came up as an amendment to a bill to authorize a patent for a sweetener. And one of my staffers found it and is like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So I went to the committee chairman at the time, and who was Joe Biden, and said to him, I can't stand by and watch this happen. He agreed with me. He actually helped me kill it in committee. We killed it in committee, and then I looked up, and Jesse Helms had tried to revive the matter on the floor. So, and then I went over and we had the knockdown, drag out debate. Just to speak his name, I'm grateful to Hal Heflin, who's deceased now, who was the senator from Alabama, who got up and said his grandfather had been a general in the Confederate Army, and it was time for us to move on from these issues and to support the one flag, the Stars and Stripes, as the flag of the United States. And so his support was one of the reasons that some of the Southerners came around and helped me defeat a patent for the Confederate flag. But again, we're talking almost 30 years ago. So that it's back is a function, again, back to the politics. This president sees it in his interest to stoke the fires of racial division and divisiveness, and to stoke arguments among people. And this is one of the arguments that I think he thinks he can win on. I pray that he's not right.
Now, given their support, Joe Biden is going to owe the Black community a massive debt if he is elected president this year. So next year, what would be the one major reform that you think would be of most use to the Black community?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that's a profound question, because it really does strike to the heart of a lot of these issues. Part of the problem of dealing with the whole issue of race in this country is that even though the civil rights movement began to give us social integration, our economy has never been integrated, or at least it hasn't been yet. And so I think that addressing some of the economic issues that plague Black America will be very, very important. And I believe Joe Biden has the capacity, certainly knows how to make government work. He can certainly do that. So that'll be, I think, the single most important thing. There are obviously other issues, like the whole question of educational opportunities, question of voting rights, and making sure that the gerrymandering stops here in the United States. Because right now, districts are drawn up here in the United States. Another thing that foreigners don't understand, our districts are drawn up on the state level. And in some cases, they're drawn up so the politicians get to pick who their voters will be, not the other way around. And so it's really bizarre, and that's got to get fixed, because until it is fixed, you will not have equality in terms of the vote here in this country. So I think that dealing with gerrymandering and the electoral system, dealing with economic integration for African Americans, educational opportunities for African Americans, those will be things that Joe Biden will be looked to begin to try to correct. And whether he can do it in one fell swoop is an open question. I'm just praying that he's given a chance to do so.
Finally, do you give Trump any credit for actively seeking the affection of the Black community on multiple occasions in a way that Republicans usually don't even try to? Or do you see that as simply box ticking?
To be fair, he's done the crime bill that they passed, that he sponsored and pushed, has done a good thing. And so I'm happy about that, because they've begun to address some of the systemic issues in terms of how our criminal justice system operates here in the United States. And so that's a good thing. I mean, my grandmother said, you always try to find something nice to say about somebody, even if you don't oppose them on everything else. But so that would be the one thing I would give him plaudits or kudos for, is the crime bill but past that, I mean, it's a disaster on just about, as far as I'm concerned, on every front. So disaster on international relations. It's a disaster on in the environment, you can write down the list.
Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun, many thanks indeed for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
Earlier today, President Trump announced a breakthrough in Middle East diplomacy, with the United Arab Emirates becoming just the third Arab nation to give full diplomatic recognition of the State of Israel. In keeping with the times, the historic step was announced on Twitter.
Huge breakthrough today, historic peace agreement between our two great friends, Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
The Palestinians are not too happy with this, though. Israel is being a little bit vague on whether they really will stop settlement activity in occupied lands. This doesn't really feel like another Camp David or Oslo Accord, but it is certainly a much-needed win for President Trump on foreign policy. He has been talking about trying to do a broader peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians for over 18 months now, and that seems to be getting absolutely nowhere. He may or may not get a signing ceremony in front of the White House between now and November, but clearly, Chaz, he's trying to turn this into some kind of evidence of he's a president doing his job on the world stage.
Yeah, and look, let's see what happens, because the different sides are saying different things at the moment. We have no idea. But if this is as billed, then it's great news, because until recently, when people thought that those areas were about to be occupied, people were saying that's the end of the two-state solution. That's it. And people are already pessimistic about the two-state solution, but that was like, we're done.
Yep.
The fact they're pulling back a little bit, potentially, if this all pans out, that's great news. So let's give credit.
Yep. It keeps that dream alive, and history says the Camp David Accords made Jimmy Carter look very good for about 5 minutes, didn't win him a second term, but the signing of the Oslo Accords and that moment between Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin in 1993 really helped to prop up Bill Clinton in his first term and helped to pave the way for his re-election in 1996. It was earlier today that the presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden called for a nationwide mask-wearing mandate. Take a look.
Every governor should mandate mandatory mask wearing. The estimates by the experts are it will save over 40,000 lives in the next 3 months.
And unsurprisingly, his newly minted running mate Kamala Harris agrees with the boss.
We just witnessed real leadership, which is Joe Biden said that as a nation, we should all be wearing a mask for the next 3 months.
Now, Joe Biden has previously said as president he would consider using his powers to impose a nationwide mandate, but as candidate, of course, he has no power at all, so he's calling on state governors, those of them that haven't imposed a mask mandate so far, to enforce one. President Trump is skipping over the whole role of state governors in this and just focusing on the idea that Joe Biden would be an oppressive president, but he himself is still pretty fuzzy on his own policy and advice in this area.
My administration has a different approach. We have urged Americans to wear masks, and I emphasized this is a patriotic thing to do. Maybe they're great, and maybe they're just good, maybe they're not so good, but frankly, what do you have to lose? You have nothing to lose.
Now, what do you have to lose? I mean, that's eerily reminiscent of hydroxychloroquine.
Yes.
Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but what have you got to lose?
Yeah.
It's still a mixed message from Trump on all this.
It is, and look, this is a smart move from Biden, because 82% of people support mask mandates, according to Hill Harris X polls. 34 states already have them. But I don't want to be a constitutional pedant here, but please, can people remember the federal government cannot institute a mask mandate. It has to. All they can do is lean on states. Has to be the state governor. Please, can people remember that? Please, Mr. President, if Joe Biden, if you become president, can you remember that? Yeah. Please.
Yeah, and clearly, Joe Biden in his remarks said, I don't want to politicise this issue of wearing masks, but I, as somebody who's not president, are saying that people should be wearing masks. So he does repoliticise it, but he does it as well, knowing all the estimates for the next 3 months as the weather cools in the United States are going to be really bad. And even though it now looks like maybe Biden is taking a bit of a political gamble in calling for this mandate, come November, it will probably look very far-sighted and very wise, because some of the projections are now saying there could be another 100,000 dead Americans between now and November.
Yeah, it really can't hurt.
Yeah, all right. Let's take a look at the COVID death toll. Yes. It has just today passed 170,000, and while things do seem to have stabilised a little bit, there are real worries. We've got schools reopening soon, some of them with in-person tuition, colleges as well, some of them with in-person tuition, that this could be how the real second wave starts.
Yeah, and to stay at this baseline at the moment, which is so high, it could be extremely high at the end of this. But so far, as you say, things are stable at the moment. If we look at the new cases, they continue to flatline at 55,000 a day. The daily deaths are continuing to flatline a little over 1,000 a day. We don't want to start the second wave from there, though. We want that to get that down. But just for some perspective, these are the top 10 countries in the world with more than 1 million people for total cases and total deaths per capita. These are total cases per capita. America is 6th in the world. And for deaths per capita, America is 8th. Note that there are different countries in each list. In the most cases per capita, there are a bunch of Middle Eastern countries with immigrant labour camps. And in most deaths per capita, there are a bunch of European countries. But the only countries in both lists are Chile, Brazil, Peru, and America. So, John, that is where America is at, trailing the world with a few developing nations in South America.
Yeah, it's not a great situation right now. All right then, we've got another guest to talk to.
We do. With 81 days to go till the election, John, we're now well in the zone where the Justice Department's not supposed to release any public findings or indictments that could affect the election. Obviously didn't work out that way in 2016. Probably won't work out that way this year either, because there's an inquiry by US Attorney John Durham into the origins of the Russiagate inquiry. It's expected to drop sometime next month or so, and we know it's going to make an impact because leaks and classified releases have already provided evidence the Steele Dossier, which was associated with the Russiagate, was woefully sourced and presented even more misleadingly. For more, let's talk to a progressive journalist who is more across this story than anyone, Aaron Marte. I spoke to him earlier today. Now, we already knew the Steele dossier was dodgy from the Inspector General's report last year, but what have we learnt new recently, in particular about the person who seems to be responsible for almost all of the dossier's major claims?
Well, we've learned that not only is the Steele report dodgy, which was not hard to guess just based on how ludicrous it was when you read it, but we also learned that the FBI was told by its so-called primary subsource that it was bunk very early on in January 2017, right as Trump took office. And what this primary subsource told the FBI was that far from being inside of Russia and having high-level Russian sources, as Steele claimed, this was a guy working at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., who knew a couple of people and basically drew his so-called intelligence that he gave to Steele from going out drinking and hearing some vague hearsay that he then passed on to Steele. And what he also told the FBI is that what Steele put in his report is actually not even what he told Steele, and that Steele himself made a whole bunch of distortions and false claims. So not only did we hear that Steele's so-called source was a joke, but then Steele took his own creative license with the hearsay and rumors that his source told him.
And when did he tell the FBI all this again?
This was in January 2017. And what is striking about that is that the Steele dossier was used to fuel this public media narrative that Trump was in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. And yet the FBI knew all along that the claims that this came from was a joke. And more, I think, more damningly for the FBI heard all this, but they still went back to the FISA court, the surveillance court inside the U.S., and got FISA warrants to spy on Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page based on the Steele dossier. So they basically committed fraud on the court, knowing that their source, the Steele dossier, was phony, but they hid that from the court to conduct spying on a U.S. citizen.
So are you blaming Christopher Steele more here, or the FBI? Or is there plenty of blame to go around?
I think Christopher Steele deserves a lot of blame here. He lied. He used his imagination to come up with these very serious allegations about some sort of treasonous plot between Trump and Russia, and that had very serious consequences. But at the same time, the FBI is responsible for its own actions as well. And in fact, I actually blame them more, because if the FBI gets some kind of lurid piece of information, they're not required to believe it and take it on faith. and use it in a application to spy on someone. They didn't do their job. And the question we should ask is why? Why were they so credulous about something so farcical? And why did they commit fraud?
At the moment, the right's trying to make this story an Obama-Biden thing rather than solely a Christopher Steele FBI thing. So, in your view, is there much evidence so far pointing to Obama himself directing unethical or illegal activity?
I certainly don't think there's any smoking gun of an Obama-Biden role here, but you also can't rule it out. And look, these were actions taken by officials under their watch. It was John Brennan, who was then the head of the CIA, who raised the alarm about the so-called sweeping Russian interference campaign. And he also tried to get made public in his discussions with key lawmakers in the summer of 2016. He tried to get made public suspicions about collusion between Trump and Russia. So all these people working right under Obama and Biden certainly did play a key role, and perhaps we'll find out if it went even higher than them.
And how much confidence do you have in the Durham inquiry? Do you think it's likely to get to the bottom of this all, or is it just a political weapon?
Well, the problem is this thing has become so partisan that it is now a political weapon. I mean, look at Trump. He's completely mishandled this pandemic. I think the worst response of any government in the world aside from Brazil. And so he especially needs something to help deflect blame from that. In the same way the Democrats needed Russiagate to deflect blame for them losing to Trump back in 2016. So I think Trump will be applying heavy pressure for some indictment or some damning revelation to come out very soon to help him in the election. And as for Durham, I don't know. He has a bipartisan reputation as being credible. Although for people who wanted to see accountability for the CIA torture program, which he investigated, he was a disappointment to many people. So, it's tough. Look, right before Trump took office, Chuck Schumer went on national TV and said that, you don't want to anger the intelligence community. He was talking about Trump. He said Trump does not want to go against the intelligence community because they have 7 ways from Sunday to get back at you. And I think that is a intimidating factor here for everybody, is that, intelligence officials have a lot of power. And no matter what side of the aisle you're on, there's going to be some reluctance to go and seek full accountability because there are consequences. The intelligence community can get back at you and they can do damage. So we'll see. But it certainly is interesting, and there has to be something because there's been a huge buildup, and this thing was such a fraud. There was all these leaked claims that were just not true, trying to paint a false picture of a Trump-Russia collusion plot. And so, hopefully there'll be some accountability for that. And, no matter how you feel about Trump, the intelligence services should not be weaponized for political ends.
Finally, there's such a vast trove of information out there about this topic. It's almost impossible to follow it all, even when it's your job. So what are your key takeaways for our viewers? And what lessons do you think most need to be learned?
Well, one takeaway is that no matter how you feel about a president, even somebody as vile as Donald Trump, that intelligence services should not be weaponized for partisan ends. We don't want to have the FBI and the CIA playing such a huge role in domestic politics, where it becomes this thing where we are told to basically revere intelligence officials, not question anything they say, and we don't mind. We're supposed to not mind if even they commit fraud to investigate a political campaign that we don't happen to like. I don't want to accept that standard because I don't want to see that same abuse of power used against candidates that I like. Bernie Sanders is who I support, and I don't want to see a Bernie Sanders investigated and undermined by intelligence officials because some of them don't like what he says about a certain foreign policy issue. That's not how politics should work. So no matter what our partisan affiliation is, we should agree that intelligence officials should not have that kind of power, not have that kind of role in domestic politics. And more broadly, I don't think we should let people with their own narrow agenda set the agenda for everybody else. So in the case of Trump and Russia, you had a convergence of Democratic neoliberals who lost to Trump, joining forces with intelligence officials. Both of these parties had their very narrow reasons for opposing Trump, but those interests were not in the interest of the broader public. It was for their own political ends. So I think one lesson to learn from this is to be skeptical of everyone's claims and to not fall for easy fixes. It was very convenient for many people to believe that Trump was a Russian agent and all we had to do was just sit back and let Robert Mueller do his job. That's not how politics works. Politics works by engaging people around issues that impact their lives and mobilizing and being out in the streets, not being, spectators to this inter-elite soap opera and spy thriller. So I'm hoping that the collapse of Russiagate and just the exposure of just how much fraud was used to wage it will help lead to a new kind of politics where we're not distracted and not immersed in these inter-elite dramas.
And that is all for another Fireside Chat. If you missed this week's Planet America, it is on ABC, iView and online now, and we will see you at the old time of 9:30 p.m. Wednesday night on ABC TV for a Democratic Convention special. Do not miss it.
And even more, don't miss this week's Pet Podcast. You'll find that right there.
Good night.
Bye-bye.